She didn't sleep anymore. In the hours assigned to rest, she wandered the corridors of the Conqueror, listening to the ship's metal bones creak as they bent on the warp's slow whim. Screams echoed down the hallways, as did the laughter that sounded like screaming. She used to assign squads of world eaters to hunt down sources of those sounds, but that habit had disintegrated, like so many other basic elements of military efficiency. The only world eaters left aboard the flagship were the ones too blood mad to take down to Terra. They were just as likely to be responsible for those screams as they were to destroy whatever was causing them. Latara moved slowly, frail as an old woman. Dehydration and starvation made her strength weakened, and she was acutely aware that the feeling of broken glass in her joints wasn't a green light, medically speaking. Even so, she moved through her ship with a fearless air, for whatever lay around each corner. The World Eaters watched her pass and took no further notice of her. The human crew wisely avoided her glare, and these days she had no orders to give them anyway. The fleet's duty consisted now of hanging in low orbit above Terra and firing whenever and wherever the Waremaster's equerry Argonis commanded. That required only a skeleton crew, a few thousand souls at most. And most of these were slaves and thralls on the gunnery decks. Today she wanted answers. She was going right to the top to get them. Lotara made her way to her personal chambers. The door refused to register her palm print, and yet another system failure. These days she couldn't keep track of them all. After several attempts, the reinforced door rumbled of its own volition. She doubted the sensor had even acknowledged her, and it seemed more like a fickle whim of the Conqueror's machine spirit. Iron groaned all around as if mimicking the captain's irritation, a deep core protest at the external abuse. The warp mist encircling Terra wasn't gentle with the War Master's fleet. It was a rough anchorage that strained the hull of each warship. The lights aboard the Conqueror had dulled to emergency red for weeks with all the power fluctuations, and even now the crimson of crisis lighting flickered as it threatened to give up. Hold it together, she breathed. We've been through worse, haven't we? The lie no longer helped, but she found herself saying it anyways. The captain's quarters exemplified the Conqueror's brutalism. A chamber of gray edges and panel slabs, with an armored window overlooking the ship's incinerated spine. When she'd first climbed in the cabin with her promotion all those years ago, Karn had been the one to escort her here. He was waiting for her there now, with his back to the view of Horus's armada. You have no manners whatsoever. These are my private quarters. It was supposed to be a jest between soldiers that had served together for years, but it came out as a parched murmur that barely reached her own ears. Karn either didn't hear her or didn't care to answer. He turned away from her, looking past the fleet, at the choked spire of Terra, around the cradle of mankind. The warp's poison tides had replaced the night sky. Karn had been silent since returning to the ship. The scarred mess of his features scarcely showed any expression, only the occasional twitch as the nails bit, and it still felt wrong seeing him without his axe. Lotara's vision swam as she stared at him, and everything reddened, everything darkened. Where Karn stood, a cluster of meat hooks hung from the ceiling on a spider layer's worth of chains. Dead world eaters, exsanguinated in ritual execution, had been suspended there. Just dead meat and ritual. Their heads taken and their skulls offered to... She closed her eyes against the venom of her own imagination, slapped herself twice. It helped little. Are you staying for this? If you are, keep out of the way. Karn turned to regard the hololithic projector against the wall. As he moved, Lotara could see the grievous damage to his armor, inflicted by bolts and blades. His breastplate was a cracked ruin, revealing the sundered flesh beneath. She could see the burst, clenched meat of one lung. As she stared at him, she heard the gentle rattle of chains moving in the breeze of the chamber's air filtration. She couldn't remember exactly when he'd returned to the ship, only that one day she looked around the bridge and there he was at his station. "You were lucky to have survived," she told him. Karn tilted his head, the way he always did, when he sought the right words. Lotera felt tears in her face, real tears, which was impossible. She hadn't wept real tears since she was an adolescent. On the day she'd received the notification her brother died in the cholera outbreak ravaging the capital. "But you didn't survive, did you?" A year ago, the question would have been madness. Now she truly wasn't sure of the answer. She knew only that she was too tired to be afraid. His only reply was to turn back from the window, facing the dying world in its kaleidoscopic sky. Lotara felt blood dripping from her nose. It hurt to look at Karn for long. It was always making her bleed, and her blood came out unpleasantly thick. The hololithic terminal gave a white noise connection screech, and she turned to it, leaning her fist on the control panel for support. "Conqueror, this is the Vengeful Spirit. Secure channel established. You may speak." "This is Saren." Lotara willed her voice to its original strength. "Link your holo, please." The projector clicked and spurted in a flickering image, aggrieved by distortion. It was one of the Astartes, the color of his warplate bleached by the hololith, but the talismans and spines on his armor detailed his allegiance without doubt. Lotara's heart sank. "I wanted the War Master. I used my Ultima clearance. With all due respect, I'm tired of seeing your face with every report, Argonis." Kerner Argonis, equerry to the War Master, inclined his head to sympathy. "I speak with the voice of Horus Lupercal, from his lips to your ears." Lotara fought not to grind her teeth. It felt good to be angry again. It felt cleansing. If it's coming out of your mouth, it's not the War Master's voice, is it? Argonis stiffened. It was obvious he thought the wretched quality of the hollow. It was obvious even through the wretched quality of the hollow. Lotara was speaking a fine line between her authority on paper and the hierarchy of her reality. She was one of the highest ranking officers in the Armada, and she had every right to speak with the War Master. But she was also human. It was becoming evident to her that this was a Legion war, a confrontation between demigods. Increasingly, Lotara felt as though she and her kind were just chaff and chattel to the legionaries. This discussion wasn't disabusing her of that notion. As she watched him, Argonis silenced the audio channel. "Captain Saren, a pleasure as always." "Please elaborate, equerry." But he didn't. The hololith blinked out of existence with a spurt of static. Lotara stared in silence. Had Argonis really played the most cringe-worthy card in his deck? Had he really severed their private channel just to avoid a conversation? "Son of a bitch!" Lotara said, with the most unreal politeness. "You childish Astartes bastard!" The hololith flared back to life, towards the end of the curse. It wasn't Argonis this time. The figure was enthroned upon white ceramite and twisted metal, slouching with wounded majesty. His eyes were sunken and edged with lines of pain, bright with fever rather than awareness. Metal talons the length of swords drummed on the armrests of the throne, with a clink, 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 audible across the box. The ghoul wearing the War Master's armor stared at her with a sort of fevered, confused intensity. Then he smiled, and he was Horus Lupercal once again. The pain fell away from his beautiful features. "I trust you weren't addressing me?" he asked. Lotara saluted. fist against her heart. My war master, I was speaking to your equerry. He has been something of an irritant. Horace waved a hand, gesturing in acknowledgement. But for a while, he said nothing more. Lotara heard her name murmured out of sight. Horace smiled again. Captain Saren. Captain Lotara Saren, of the warship Conqueror. I trust all is well. How may I be of service? War Master Lupercal. Horace interrupted her. The rose watered with blood. Lotara's jaw tightened. It surprises me you're aware of that poem, War Master. Horace ran his gloved hand over his shaved head, as he relaxed as a demigod could be in casual conversation. By the saga poet Euryclides de Martos, was it not? Whatever happened to him, Captain Saren? Martos had died with the rest of the remembrancers of Lord the Conqueror when Angron had given the order to end their theatrics once and for all. As far as Lotara was concerned, nothing of value was lost on that day. Karn killed him, Lord, and took great pleasure in doing so. I only regret we couldn't kill the poem too. Horace chuckled. Indeed, indeed. War Master, if I may ask, she began, but Horace interrupted her again, his smile becoming a grin. And worshipped foes, awarded medals carved upon flesh, and scars of shrapnel and sourceless fire, this flock, her flock, unburied, with great drifting tombs of silent iron, a queenly shadow cast against the dappled theater of eternal fusion, across the tide of our voiceless ocean. And here, enshrined in this royal steel, we carve her invocation. Lotara watched the Emperor's own son, War Master of the Imperium, as he recited the final lines of the poem written in tribute to her. It was bad enough to endure when courtiers across the Imperium had lapped up that insipid verse like fops, burying their faces in the trial of literary propaganda and insisting they were dining on high art. But to hear it in the War Master's deep and kindly tone was almost too much to bear. She wasn't sure if he was mocking her. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. War Master, I only wish to speak of supplying the fleet. With the ash thinning out, we can harvest more resources from the surface. My crews are starving, dying of thirst. She could see Horace wasn't listening. His lockjaw grin had faded. With cold assurance, the War Master gestured with great talon. Melogurst, attend me! Lotara held her tongue. Melogurst was long dead. Argonis entered the picture instead. He leaned down, speaking in Horace's ear. She couldn't follow any of this. It was a fight not to let her discomfort show in front of the fey ghoul that the War Master had become. I am wary, Captain Saren. As you are, I imagine, yes. We all are, aren't we? But our triumph is close. It is close. This I promise you. War Master, please. She trailed off. She didn't like how he was looking at her, the sudden fervency in his sickened eyes. You don't realize, do you? Realize what, Lord? That you're not her. You're not Lotara Saren. Before she could muster the breath for a reply, not that she had any idea what to say, it was over. The signal was severed. Horace was gone. So, it's interesting that she figured out that Karn is dead. But it's weird that dead Karn doesn't have his axe, so maybe he's not dead. Very slim, maybe, though. But I guess Lotara is dead, but that just, to me, it's just weird because it brings up the possibility that there are many soldiers under Horace's banner that are serving after death. Some sort of And that's really what's confusing everyone else. It's confusing. It's a mess. I don't know if she's dead or not, though. The Land Raider bore across the wasteland, rocking and shaking over the broken earth, and the gunner's cupola, Cargos, grinned at the handle of the heavy bolter, sighting down the barrel at the shapes resolving through the dust. They were closing fast on the refugee convoy. It was a hell of a convoy, streaming across the wasteland from the Sanctum Imperialis. From the size of it, several refugee trains and retreating Legion forces had all linked up to make their final run for the sanctuary. The War Master's horde had the numbers, though. Cargos felt an itch in the back of his head. Soon, he told the nails. Almost there. They bit back in reply, unsoothed. The nails had no patience. Logistics were meaningless. They fed on emotion. They wanted adrenaline. They wanted the blood to flow. And he would be punished until he made it happen. It would be a risky assault, this close to the walls of the Sanctum Imperialis. The Delphic battlement ringing the Emperor's castle was only 5 kilometers to the west, leaving them practically in range of the wall guns. Within range of Titan guns, certainly, and just as definitely within Thunderhawk range. The forces at the Sanctum wouldn't bombard their own arriving convoys with blind fire, and the ash reduced all hopes of precision targeting at that range. Gunships, though, they were a possibility with the dust thinning day after day. Titans, they were a risk too. They were starting to venture away from the Delphic battlement, punishing any raiders that struck too close. Cargos' eye lenses had long lost their ability to zoom and refocus. Endless incidental damage to his helmet over the war's course had killed that functionality. He had to look through magnoculars to make out the convoy's scale, at least what the ash would allow him to make out. Do you see it? Enzar called up from the tank's innards. It is a big one. We'll have to hit it hard to break through. Enzar acknowledged him, and Cargos could hear the preacher relaying more orders over the Vox. Their tank was at the lead of the assault force, a stolen 7th Legion Land Raider, cutting ahead of the pack to form the tip of a ragged formation. With so many Imperial convoys streaming across the wasteland between the Palatine bastions, the bounty of targets made for easy prey. Scenting blood, the War Master's horde poured into no man's land, and their hundreds of thousands, hunting down fleeing Imperials with abandon. With the most directionless slaughter still served the war's purpose. Every soul killed in the districts of the Inner Palace was a soul that would never pick up a weapon to defend the Sanctum Imperialis. The Legion officers on the ground let their warriors loose, letting massacre and butchery become quaint tactical virtues. The Emperor, wherever he was, still couldn't see reason. That much was obvious to the War Master's horde. The closer they came to the walls of the final fortress, the weaker their never-born allies were, and the rarer their manifestations became. Cargos hadn't seen his Primarch since the astral display above the Avalon, days before, but Enzar was forever ready with assurances that Angron was out there, tearing down the Palatine bastion. Thoughts of his Gene-sire made the nails sizzle, a not entirely unpleasant heat. An example for his sons to follow, the preacher had said, a Messiah. Freedom from death, immortality through annihilation. The words echoed through the gladiator's mind in a ceaseless cycle. He hadn't spoken any more of it, though he kept sensing Enzar's eyes upon him. Judging, always judging. As they drew close to the convoy, the World Eater panned the viewfinder across the distant shapes of Legion armor and army transports. Given the horde's advance, all retreat would soon be cut off. Fewer and fewer reinforcements were reaching the Sanctum. From this column might be the last. It was Cargos' 9th convoy raid, or perhaps his 10th. They tended to blend together, just like the days and nights. On the last one, be it the 8th or 9th, he'd stolen the tank they now commanded. That had been Enzar's decision. Cargos had been content to sit huddled in the rattling confines of a Rhino transport, but he freely admitted that their new vehicle made their predatory duty so much easier. The ash and dust were thinning over time, and that helped even more. Gunships were flying again in brief bursts. Titan support was beginning to show up. Orbital drops were no longer in the purview of blind prayer. It was far easier to hunt when you could see what you were hunting. He turned the magnoculars to the west. He could see it now, the suggestion in the distance, a hazy shadow consistent with the horizon that used to be. A siege wall. The last siege wall. Far from here, but not far enough. He called down to Enzar. "I can see the sanctum!" Enzar's reply came with a growl. "We're getting too close to the sanctum. Let us make this raid swift. In and out, my friend. No last stands, no heroes. Save it for the final assault." Cargos heard this, relayed across the box. The Horde's shared communication channel turned into a howling orchestra of voices in reply. Military order was a truly thin facade these days. The Imperial convoys they hit were always slowed by the weight of their own responsibilities. Legion tanks and Imperial Army armor ringed the vulnerable wounded civilians in their midst. But it was a simple matter of breaking through that outnumbered defenders to shatter their unity. With their Land Raider, laboring at barely 40 kilometers an hour over the churned earth, they were fast enough to catch the Outriders at the edges of the burdened convoy. More than once, defensive rings had refused to fight. Cargos thought little of it. It was a matter of naked practicality. The warriors of those legions considered it more prudent to reach the Sanctum Imperialis rather than to die in vain out in the wasteland. Enzar, however, took great delight in watching the Imperials abandon their own wounded warriors and defenseless refugees. He chanted praise and thanks to his mad gods each time it happened, promising them a harvest of sacrifice. This was a promise he consistently delivered on. As they ranged ahead of the bulk of the slaughter, though, they ranged ahead of their own human forces and the demonic things that were born in the minutes of its massacres. The Horde swelled with every death on their side, and Cargos found himself in the vanguard of a breathtaking tide. He sometimes caught Enzar listening to the scale of that tide. The preacher would tune in the general voxweb, allowing himself to be assailed by an infinity of shrieks, screams, snarls, and scrap code. To Cargos, it was just noise. He told himself he didn't hear any music in the sound, just beneath the surface. He asked Enzar, naturally, "Why do you do that?" The preacher had just smiled. "I like to meditate on the melody of enlightenment." After the last raid, Enzar had summoned Cargos over to him. They stood in the shadow of the tank they were about to steal. To the west was Meru Bastion, a burning silhouette in the dust. Enzar had been walking among the bodies, dispatching the wounded that took his interest. Those that found uninteresting he kicked aside, leaving them to bleed out and expire from their injuries. "Preacher!" Cargos greeted him. "My friend!" Enzar replied. The chaplain was distracted, hauling a dying one-armed Imperial fist to his knees. The warrior's chest plate was horrendously ruptured, and his helmet had been torn clear, showing a vicious blade wound to the face that had stolen both his eyes and damaged his mind. It was a miracle the warrior still lived at all. Enzar started scalping him. "We will take this Land Raider," the chaplain said while he carved. Cargos grunted noncommittally. "If you say so." "Help me with this, would you?" The Imperial fist struggled, but Cargos kept the dying man on his knees. The word-bearer ran a curved Colchesian dagger in a sawing circle around the top of the warrior's head, then took a fistful of hair. "For the Emperor!" swore the Imperial fist. "For the Emperor!" "Yes, yes," Enzar humored him. The chaplain tightened his grip and pulled. There was the sound of leather tearing, and Enzar kicked the scalped warrior to the ground. Cargos looked down at the Imperial fist. The man was crawling towards him, reaching in useless defiance in his fading eyes. The World Eater admired that. It showed gladiatorial spirit. A single bolt from his pistol cracked out, ending the Imperial fist's useless protestations. The warriors drew near. The mix of all 9 of the War Master's legions that was becoming more common with every battle. Enzar bound his newest scalp to his belt, using the dead man's hair and a squirt of his armor cement. He looked at the gathered Astartes. As he did so, which one of you wants to drive? So that brings up, he said that all 9 of the legions were there. That's interesting because the Emperor's Children Legion are known for choosing to plunder Terra instead of actually assaulting the Bastion, the Sanctum Imperialis. But it could be just that they're so chaotic and scattered that while many of them were plundering, others just through, I mean, not my osmosis, but diaspora ended up actually making the final assault. But in any case, just by the way this reads from every single perspective, the war on the ground was won completely. There was no possible room